Good afternoon, everyone. Michael Pugliese here with Circadia. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I am joined by Caitlin and George from our team, and today we're going to be talking about skin and aging, causes, treatments, and prevention options. Before we get started, just a couple bits of housekeeping. We've had a couple questions that have come in over the last couple days about some of the previous webinars and how to be able to access those. I'm going to have George detail that out a little bit, where to find those resources that we've had. In particular, we've had a lot of questions about the comeback webinars that we've done over the last couple weeks in regards to how people are getting back to work. We've been getting some exciting news from all parts of the country. Just yesterday, we found out that California has now opened up hair services, which is a big step for salon and spa services. We know that that means that a lot of locations are going to be opening up. Of course, there's still some questions as to counties as to exactly what that means specifically, but it certainly is a step in the right direction for those of us who are ready and wanting to get back to work. So some exciting news there. But as I mentioned, we've already started to lay out some guidelines, some assistance for how people can start to get back to work, and people have been asking where they can actually find those on our website. These are pre-recorded webinars that we did a few weeks ago with some of our industry friends. So George, I'm gonna just turn it over to you for just a quick moment to talk to our viewers and explain to them how they can get a hold of those resources.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So we've actually been doing Wednesday webinars probably for the last couple of months now. So we do know it's hard for you to get on a webinar and stay on the webinar the full entire time. So all of the webinars are going to be, they are recorded. And so you can find the replay on the Circadia website called circadia.com/replay. So I'll be sure that Caitlin puts this in the chat so you guys can copy that link as well. But another thing that we've actually been working on is we started to kind of build out a guide for the relaunch, or also the comeback. Now that spas are coming back post COVID-19, you know, it's a completely different world now compared to 4 or 5 months ago on the way that we are starting to treat our clients' skin. So we've built out a whole entire guide for you all to take advantage of. And so that's also on the Circadia website called circadia.com/relaunch. We'll also add that to the chat section as well, so you guys can access that link directly on there. But we also created a whole entire kind of video that kind of walks you through our Circadia website as far as different landing pages that you guys can access.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, George. Caitlin, how's my seat? A little bit better? Don't look like I'm sitting on a bucket anymore?
No, you're good. It's much better.
Okay. All right. So I'm gonna. Our webinars, they're timed for about an hour. We usually run a little bit longer. This one is a lot of subject matter, a lot of material that we're going to cover, so it's definitely going to run a little bit longer. But as George mentioned, we do record these so that you can come back and watch a little bit later. So do stay with us as long as you possibly can. But if you need to hop off, of course, these will be recorded, and we'll make sure that you have access to them later. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. George, can you enable that for me? Because it's still saying that the host cannot share my screen. I'm unable to share.
Yep, give me 1 second and we'll get that started.
Thank you. George keeps me on point and makes sure I don't share things that I'm not allowed to share.
Okay, Michael, go ahead and try now.
Okay. Share screen. And here we are. Okay. All right, Caitlin, can everybody see that okay?
Yes, we're good.
All right, so we're ready to get started. So as I mentioned, skin and aging, it's a pretty broad topic, and you know, everything that we're going to be discussing and the bullet points that we'll be drilling down on today, you know, each one of those could really be its own webinar in itself. So we're really going to be covering some of this material in broad strokes, and I of course encourage you to kind of go back and do some research and look at some of these individual topics on your own. But we're going to be talking about specifically what is aging. We're going to try and give it a broad definition, but really kind of looking at the individual prominent aging theories and what we can do to address them individually. A lot of these aging theories really drive formulary science, what we use in professional skincare. One of the the key things about Circadia that makes us a little bit different and unique among some of the other great brands out there is that we're very heavily rooted in research and development and manufacturing. Here in Pennsylvania, we are an FDA-registered ISO manufacturing facility, and we make all of our products in-house, which means we have very close ties and relationships to the ingredient suppliers within the industry. So we do all of our own sourcing. Much like you, as estheticians, you go to trade shows and events, and you go to visit skincare brands, and you talk to them about their new technologies and their launches. We do the same thing when we go to visit the ingredient suppliers, and we bring them back and we incorporate them into our formulations. So it's something that allows us to really stay on the cutting edge of new technology, and that's something that has been in place long before Circadia was even a brand. My grandfather, Dr. Pugliese, founded this company in 2001, and it's something that is really in the DNA, if you will, of what makes Circadia a part of who we are. So we're going to talk about some of those prominent aging theories and the ingredient technology that we utilize to address them. And of course, I'll highlight some of that ingredient technology as well. When we look at aging, and we try to give ourselves a good definition, if you Google it or try to look it up in a dictionary, what you'll see is something like this, which is the gradual deterioration of a mature organism resulting from time-dependent, irreversible changes in structure that are intrinsic to the particular species, and eventually lead to the decreased ability to cope with the stresses of the environment, thereby increasing the probability of death. That is a very technical definition of aging, which sounds awful, but it doesn't tell us what aging actually is. It tells us the outcome, but it doesn't tell us anything about the actual process. So many of us actually know what aging looks like. We know what aging actually feels like, but no one has the exact answer specifically for what aging is. We have to take a look at a lot of different aspects and a combination of different, what we call theories, but different elements that are combined together to give us the picture of what we see as and what we know as and what we feel as aging. So a lot of those are things that we look at that are scientifically found concepts and that have a real basis in physiology. When we look at some of the prominent theories of aging, they all kind of fit under what we refer to the umbrella term as genomic instability. So we're going to kind of get into a little bit of biochemistry here. I'm going to highlight these, and I'm going to do my best to circle back around and bring this all back to the relevance of skincare and professional skincare treatments. So stick with me on all of this. But genomic instability really is the breakdown in the integrity of DNA structures. And when we look at aging, really, that's what it is. It's just the overwhelming influences that our environment and things that are happening inside the body are happening to the system, really the engine that makes us go. So when we talk about aging, you can look at and filter down all of the things that happen to the body and to the skin throughout the course of a lifetime as genomic instability. And of course, underneath that, we have all of those kind of micro concepts. So you have the macro concept of the genomic instability and all these others. So epigenetic alterations, which we'll talk about, mitochondrial dysfunction, which in large part falls underneath the free radical theory of aging, telomere attrition, which we'll talk about, which has a lot to do with DNA structural integrity, but also the fact that every time a DNA cell divides, every time skin cells divide in the basal layer and move up towards the surface, they're losing a piece of the end of the DNA structure, which is called a telomere. So again, all of these fascinating topics that can be expanded upon greatly, but they've made their way in medical terms into professional skincare. And we have ingredient technologies that are now also part of the vernacular of aesthetics. Glycation, which is something that is, I would say at this point, relatively prominent in the aesthetic industry, but still relatively misunderstood. This is something that my grandfather has been talked about for many, many years. In fact, he published the first trade article on glycation back in 2008, which is now the most widely referenced aesthetic article in Skin Inc. magazine on the subject of glycation. And we still talk about a lot to this day, and we'll discuss it briefly. UV light, of course, ultraviolet radiation, everyone knows that is a big factor in how we see aging manifest, but also blue light, which has become much more prominent of a concept, and we understand that blue light exposure from devices, not just cell phones, but computers and a lot of our electronic screens, but also the fact that blue light is being emitted from light that we see outside. actually very little of the blue light that we get and the blue light emissions are coming from our devices. Those are being filtered out now from screens, but we were getting a lot from outdoor exposure. Barrier function and oxidative stress, these also tie in with mitochondrial dysfunction and free radical theories. And then really the underlying cause of all of this is inflammation. So they're not independent of one another, all of these concepts, right? And when we see aging, they're a collection of all of these things together. So there's no magic bullet, right? There's no one thing that resolves all of these issues together. So you see, again, so many different things that we have on the market to be able to treat and address a lot of what we're talking about here. So there's no one that has the single answer. So we address it from a multi-pronged approach. Caitlin, feel free to jump in if we do have questions. Again, we do have a lot of material to move through, so we'll try to keep it moving as quickly as possible.
Sure. And if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them into the question and answer box that should be listed on your panel. And if we skip over your question, we'll always make sure to get back to it when Michael takes a break. So again, the question and answer section is the best place to be answering your questions.
Okay, great. So, you know, we talk about products that work on a cellular level, which I always have to chuckle at a little bit. I mean, I've said it. We see it in marketing terms all the time. And, you know, of course, products work on a cellular level. How could they not? I mean, these are being utilized on the skin, and the skin is made up of skin cells, and they're designed to work and penetrate into the majority of the skin cells that we're working with. So, yes, we are working on a cellular level, but today we are educating on a cellular level. So we've got to talk a little bit about some anatomy of the cells. A little bit on genes and chromosomes and DNA. When I talk about genomic instability, and I know, again, a lot of us are not formally trained, and I want to give you a little bit of background on myself. I've been working in the aesthetic industry since 2004. I joined Circadia right out of college with a business management and marketing degree. So I know nothing about biochemistry, microbiology, let alone aesthetics and formulary chemistry. I was not the science person that I am today, but I knew enough about business to know that I needed to know these things in order to help work within the family business. So I was just fortunate enough to have Dr. Pugliese, my grandfather, be probably the most knowledgeable person in the industry on all these other things. So I made it my mission to really work with him and focus on these things, and also seek out other brilliant educators in the industry and learn from them, people like Rebecca James Gadberry and Dr. Mark Lees and Christine Heathman and Florence Barrett Hill and so many others that have helped to shape our industry and really inform us. And you know, that's what we're doing today. So we're learning these things. So for 15 years, I've spent a lot of time learning and understanding this, and it's always progressing and it's always evolving. So I know there's, you know, maybe a couple hundred or even, you know, more that will eventually see this webinar, but understand that even if you don't understand all of this now, take a couple bits and pieces from it and then use that and build from that as you move along and start to progress. I know some of you are students that are watching this right now, and some of you may be veterans in the industry for 20 years. And no matter what, if this is new to you or this is something that you've understood for quite some time, it's an interesting time to be in the industry, to say the least, as far as where we're heading with the technology that is now and will become available to us in the future. So with that said, when we look at the DNA structures, when we look at DNA, we see this unwrapped DNA helix, and those DNA structures are important because that makes up the genetic code, right? And when we look at it in a marketing piece or an educational piece of material, we're seeing it completely unwrapped. We're seeing these chromosomes completely unwound, and that's this double U shaped structure that is the chromosome, right? So the genome makes those up, and the chromosomes are these W structures. But again, when that is completely unwound, that's when we actually see all this DNA. That's when we see these DNA structures. And the DNA structures have opposing pairs. And when we talk about genomic instability, it's the damage to these DNA structures as a whole that really is what we're talking about when we talk about the impacts of aging. Now we're going to talk about something else called epigenetic alteration. So keep that in mind, because what we're looking at here again is an unwrapped or unwound chromosome. There's something else that has to help to keep this wound together relatively tightly, and that is called a histone. And that's what we're going to be talking about when we talk about epigenetics, because something has to be help to keep these wound pretty tightly. So again, genomic instability, a basic definition, can be viewed as the collective damage that the DNA incurs from a series of factors. In biochemistry, they're referred to exogenous and endogenous factors. In professional skincare, we call them intrinsic and extrinsic factors, things that are happening outside the body, and then things are happening that are inside the body, some of which we have control over and some that we don't. So any type of environmental damage, environmental cosmetics are something that have been really broadly studied, whether it's ultraviolet exposure. Pollution is one that's been studied in parts of the world in particular where we have high levels of pollution over the last, I would say, maybe decade, but it's really making its way into aesthetic science now. You're hearing more about the environment and how the environment affects the skin, in particular in conjunction with the microbiome and the level of bacteria that's on your skin. If you're not familiar with either of those concepts, we all have a layer of bacteria on the surface of the skin, just as we do inside the gut. That's referred to as the microbiome. In fact, one brand of ingredient supply has now referred it and coined the term stratum microbiome. So it's a whole layer of bacteria that is unique to the individual, and that changes with age. And there's good bacteria on the skin, and there's bad bacteria, considered to be bad pathogenic bacteria, things like staph, that can cause very bad infections. But all of these things could potentially be influencing and creating inflammation and damage. So, all of these things are kind of, again, under the umbrella of environmental cosmetics. So some things that we can control and some things that we don't necessarily have control of. So outside the body and inside the body. Taking a look again at under that umbrella of genomic instability is epigenetic alteration. So again, when we examine and take a look at that double U structure, that is the chromosome. But when that chromosome is completely unwound, what you see here are the rungs, the ladders rather, of the DNA structures, right? And the DNA is capable of damage from all different types. One of the ones we'll take a look at that we can all relate to as aestheticians is ultraviolet radiation. When you have UV exposure, those DNA structures, right, that have alternating pairs, what will happen is in the epidermis, the cells of the epidermis, those DNA structures, they will cross-link, right? They will form together and create a cross-linking, which actually creates what's called a dimer. And dimers can lead to mutations, and mutations can lead to skin cancer, right? Unfortunately, the body can have, to a certain degree, the ability to repair that damage, but the DNA is constantly under attack from a variety of different insults. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, and there's ingredients that we'll focus on and discuss that can actually help with that DNA repair. But take a look at these little ball-like structures with these tails. So these are called histones, and the histones are how these DNA structures are able to be coiled, right? So you can think of them almost like a spool that the DNA becomes wrapped around. And what makes this so interesting is the DNA is the genetic code. That's what makes you, right? That makes you unique and individual. And for many years, or for everything that we know, we understand that the DNA structure, that's what can be passed genetic makeup on to your future generations. But what's interesting about the epigenetics is that these are damages that can occur from behaviors that can be passed on from one generation to another. So for example, if you're engaging in behaviors that are creating damage to yourself, whether it be, again, ultraviolet radiation, smoking, poor dietary habits, if it's pollution, stress, all of these things are creating what are called tags. So you see what are called epigenetic factors, and these tags end up on top of these histones. What's recently been discovered is these tags can actually be passed on to children and then on to grandchildren. So most of them will actually fall off, but some of them can actually be passed on to future generations. Now, you're probably asking the question, well, why is this relevant it may be relevant to aging, but why is it relevant to skin? It does actually affect the appearance of the skin overall and how the skin is able to interpret and assess damage. And this is, again, something that's relatively new as far as how it's being studied. But even things like a simple extract like calendula. Calendula is a very calming extract. It's used quite frequently on oncology aesthetics because of just how soothing it can be for cancer patients. But calendula has actually been shown to help to stabilize the epigenome and help to get rid of and remove some of these epigenetic tags that can be passed on to future generations. So this is now something that's being studied very heavily, and there's specialty ingredients that are being developed to incorporate into our skincare formulations for this purpose. So again, this is a very vast topic. This is something that can be discussed for a long period of time, and people that have a much larger and better grasp of it than I do are spending a lot of time focusing on this. So it's just one highlight to be able to bring to you in this discussion. This is one particular ingredient that I highlighted in a lecture not that long ago called delopoleuthane, which is, again, designed to help to protect the epigenome. And they talk a lot about how air pollution and contaminants can get onto the skin. In fact, they're even measuring sizes of particles that are getting into the skin, right? They're measuring different particle sizes. You can see here 0.1 microns up to 10 microns. And these are coming from exhaust fumes from cars, or coming from, in places like New York City, tire rubber, particulate matter from tires, parts of Asia where, you have very high pollution and output. They're actually getting into the surface of the skin and reacting with ultraviolet radiation and creating what are now referred to as halogen pigmentation and halogen acne. So the contaminants and the pollutants that are getting onto the skin are reacting with other parts of our environment, ultraviolet radiation, and creating this type of skin condition. So scary to think about, but also fascinating that all of these pictures are being put together, and our understanding and our comprehension of why is being much more understood. And even better, that we have ingredients to help to combat this type of damage that we're starting to understand. So here's some information here for you to be able to look over. And again, we know these recordings are going to be available, so you'll have access to take a look at these. But PM, which again is dictating the particle size, and the 10, which is the amount, the size of it, microns, and PM 2.5, that's talking about the size of the actual particles that are able to get into the skin and react with the different factors in the environment. So again, a little bit more about environmental cosmetics. And then again, this is nothing new, but it's certainly being more magnified and a little bit more studied. One of the things that I found extremely interesting while I was learning about this, and again, the comprehension is getting much, much better, but we go back and look at, oh wow, that we're now understanding that the ingredient technology that we already do have is also helping to address this. So our Revitacite complex is a fantastic product. For those of you that are familiar with Circadia already, we utilize many wonderful ingredients. EUK-134 is something that helps to protect the mitochondria. It has a biomimetic form of superoxide dismutase. But we also have an ingredient in here called tetrahexadecylascorbate, which is a very popular oil-soluble form of vitamin C. That has also been shown to help to protect the integrity of the epigenome. So just, again, another layer of efficacy for an ingredient that's already great. And just wanted to bring that to your attention. I mean, this is probably one of my favorite products. It doesn't get the credit that it's due. It's got chronocyclin, which is a vitamin D optimizing peptide, helps to increase vitamin D expression. It's a great vitamin A alternative, and one of my favorites in the line. Okay, Caitlin, any questions before we move on to the next concept?
One quick question. So a lot of what you had mentioned as far as epigenetic alterations in those histones and tags, you were mentioning a lot of extrinsic factors that were creating that. Are there intrinsic factors like stress and, PTSD and those things that can also create histones or tags on the histones?
Yeah, no doubt about that. I mean, again, there's a lot that I don't know about this and how it forms. I mean, there are epigeneticists. This is a whole study of medicine and science But the more I read about it, the more I'm just so intrigued and so fascinated, and know that this is definitely something that's going to take up a big part of the space of formulary science in the future. So yes, I mean, for sure, there are a lot of things that will influence those epigenetic tags and how those can be passed on. And there was a study, and I can't cite the source, but maybe we can find it for the viewers and come back to it later, where they had twins that were separated at birth, and then they had two very different environments where they grew up, and one was again, smoker, poor diet, very poor hygiene, bad decisions, let's just say that, and then another that was raised in a very different way. And you could they were doing some measurements of these histone modifications, so a very clear way to actually measure how they're coming about these and developing these individual histone modifications. So again, I'm relatively novice of the actual science. I'm able to read it, but I'm not involved directly in the actual research of it. I'm just able to feed on as much of the information that I can possibly get. But the most fascinating part of all of it is that it's medical technology that once again finds its way into professional skincare, which is where we all live. And just exciting to see that we have answers to how we can help to solve some of these issues that our clients are having every day, and how we can maintain the overall health of the skin for as long as we can.
Great. One more quick question before we move on from Revitacite, because I do also think Revitacite never gets the attention that it fully deserves. I personally have been using it for the last almost 8 months because I needed a vitamin A alternative, and I would say it has now become my favorite product, only because the softness that it leaves. It leaves your skin incredibly soft, and just has really, really great benefits. But we do have a question about using Revitacite in conjunction with Nighttime Repair Plus. Would that be something you would say alternate, or what would be a better pairing of the Revitacite with a vitamin A?
Right. We'll have a chance to talk a little bit about vitamin A, because it helps to address the issue of stem cell exhaustion, which we do see at a later age as well. That's one of the reasons why vitamin A is such a great addition to an anti-aging treatment. We developed the Revitacite because we didn't have a great alternative to vitamin A, and we know that not everybody can use it. More than anything, it comes down to an issue of cost. It's usually an either or, but there's nothing wrong with cocktailing the two of them together, or alternating. The issue, if you alternate one night on, one night off, is that you're kind of staggering your vitamin A use. The vitamin A products that we have are designed to be used on a consistent basis. Right, we have a 0.3 and a 0.5% of the Nighttime Repair in the Plus. So if you're going to use them, our recommendation is to use it every evening to get to a point where the skin is acclimated, where they're not seeing some of the potential drawbacks of vitamin A, redness, flaking, any kind of blemishing, and they can use it consistently. Again, as long as they're using it at night and they're not using any kind of, and they're making sure they're using a good SPF and adequate photo protection, it shouldn't be a problem. But no, there's no reason to not use the two of them together. It's just, it really comes down to cost, and that's usually why it's one or the other. If you're using the Revitacite with Switch, then you probably shouldn't use the vitamin A, because Switch and vitamin A can be a contraindication.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so here's a quote from the man himself, Dr. Pugliese. Chronic daily invisible inflammation sustained over a lifetime is truly the underlying cause of aging. And again, when you look at these prominent theories of aging, the common thread is always inflammation, which again is one of the reasons why it can also be slowed in many ways, and it can actually be stopped in many points of the pathway of inflammation, because inflammation follows a pathway. So it's really interesting when we take a look at it from that perspective of following a pathway. This is a diagram that I show in a lot of our presentations, and it's exactly what I was just discussing as far as those DNA structures being cross-linked. So what you're seeing here is UV radiation, specifically UVB, and what's happening is the UVB is radiating the epidermal keratinocytes, and DNA structures have opposing pairs. Right? But when you have this type of damage, what's happening here when you see these two yellow structures together, they're creating a cross-link. And again, the body has the ability to go in and repair that type of damage. It's just that when it happens once, a single exposure, and then another exposure the next day, and then one the next day, we see an overwhelming of that repair mechanism. Right? And this is just one example that we can all relate to as estheticians, because the most important thing we do as skincare professionals is recommend good sun protection. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So just by simply doing that, we can prevent this type of damage, because as I mentioned, the dimers can ultimately lead to mutations, and the mutations ultimately lead to some skin cancer. You know, and we'd be remiss to not talk about this now, because May is, of course, Melanoma Awareness Month. And, you know, the vast majority of melanoma, getting in front of it is about early detection. So when we talk about, you know, the DNA damage to the structures, we're talking about this specifically, and talking about things that we can do to assist in this type of damage. By the way, one of the reasons why this is so important to understand when we talk about circadian rhythms is that this also has a time and place. Right? When we see this happening, we're seeing this happen during the day, during ultraviolet exposure is at its height during the day. It's one of the reasons why we're also talking about using vitamin A in the evening. Vitamin A is a proliferative agent, right? It's forcing this type of cell turnover. When we see that DNA unwound, the slides that we just took a look at a few slides back, when we're seeing that unwound, that's happening when cells are dividing in the epidermis. There's 30 times more cell turnover in the evening than there is during the day, right? That's part of our circadian rhythm. All those repair mechanisms are taking place in the evening so that the cells aren't dividing during the day. If those cells were dividing during the day, it would make these DNA structures that we're looking at right now much more susceptible to that type of damage. So the cell division occurs naturally as part of that circadian rhythm at night versus during the day. So the skin's in a state of defense during the day, more so in a state of repair at night. So we're, again, just really trying to assist those natural daily defense and evening repair systems. Okay, so back to those, you asked about, you know, what happens inside and outside, those intrinsic and extrinsic factors. Here we're looking at some of the stupid things that people will do to themselves as far as those factors. So, of course, you know, some of the two worst that we're looking at here is ultraviolet exposure and smoking. Those two produce massive amounts of damage that overwhelm the body and the system as a whole. Dietary intake, as it pertains to glycation specifically, is something that we've talked about and continues to be a big factor. Pollution and also certain cosmetics, not the ones that we might think that we talk about, preservatives and things, that's been a controversy for many years, but the ones that could potentially create inflammation, dehydration, you know, things like hyaluronic acid, which we know is a great ingredient. We use it a lot in professional skincare. We use it quite a bit in the Circadia line, very specific forms. But if it's not used correctly, if it's not used correctly in the right environment, it can actually create dehydration. Right? It absorbs water, but if it's absorbing water to the surface of the skin in a very arid environment, it's going to evaporate quickly. So you have to use it and then apply emollients on the top of the surface, over the top of the surface, so that it's appropriately trapping water and not pulling moisture from areas of the skin where it's not supposed to, and it evaporates into the environment quickly. Drug abuse, of course, is an epidemic here that we see in the United States. Also causes advanced aging, certain types of drugs in the individual, and of course alcohol can be a huge problem. Of course, moderation for many people there doesn't make it as big of an issue. But these are all things, all different factors that are intrinsic and extrinsic factors, combinations that impact the integrity of the genome. What's great again about all these different types of damage is that we have counterbalance systems. We have things that can help to create repair mechanisms. We have these different pathways of repair to help to address the damage that we see. So just about every type of damage that occurs to the DNA, there's a counterbalance, a check measure of repair. But it's the overwhelming and the constant damage to the system that ultimately wears it down. Now, when we talk about the free radical theory of aging, most people that support that theory, the free radical theory of aging, what we're really talking about quite a bit is mitochondrial dysfunction, and the fact that the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, is really responsible for producing almost all the energy in the form of ATP. ATP, adenosine triphosphate, it's the molecular currency, it's the gas that makes the engine go. All cells that make energy require it. Most skin cells have hundreds. Muscle cells have thousands because of the amount of output that they're required to have, and it's a double membrane structure. And here inside that membrane we have functioning what's called the Krebs cycle. This is a jelly cytoplasmic-like material, which is called the matrix, and this is really, again, where we see almost all of the energy of the cell being produced, and it's a really interesting system. I'll give you a resource to actually go and learn a little bit more. You can actually see it in perpetual motion, but unfortunately, as that system's working and creating all the energy that the cells need, it's also creating a very specific free radical that is damaging the mitochondria. It's damaging the cell as a whole, and that's called superoxide. Right? Superoxide is a free radical that's part of a family called the reactive oxygen species. And fortunately for us, we have an enzyme that's made by the body to help to counterbalance that called superoxide dismutase. You may recognize that as a skincare ingredient that's used throughout the industry. Superoxide dismutase is a skincare ingredient, but it's also an enzyme that's made by the body to counteract that free radical superoxide. Right? So I'm going to take a step back here, and Caitlin, just help me out and make sure that I'm covering everything here thoroughly enough. And if there are any questions that pop up, because I know this is can be a little bit more of an advanced topic.
Sure.
What you're looking at again is the mitochondria. It's making all the energy, but inside the mitochondria is a double membrane structure. When we're looking inside the inner membrane, functioning here, we have what's called the matrix. So the matrix is the jelly-like cytoplasm, but inside the matrix you have what's called the Krebs cycle. Now, if you had a piece of fruit for breakfast, that fruit in the digestive system is being broken down into simple sugars like glucose. And that glucose is then being carried to all cells, but let's say for the purposes of skin's discussion, it's going to be carried to fibroblast cells that make collagen and dermis, or basal cells that are going to be dividing in the epidermis. Once that sugar, once that glucose gets into that cell, it's going to be converted through a process called glycolysis into a material called pyruvic acid. So the sugars will be converted to pyruvic acid and enter into the mitochondria in order to make ATP. Pyruvic acid then enters into the Krebs cycle, and here we see a whole system of biological active changes, biological actives that are occurring here, and it's kicking off different molecules, and it initiates another system called the electron transport system, but the end result is a massive amount of ATP that's being produced. What's really interesting about this is we can affect this system to produce energy, especially in a mature, damaged skin. We can actually utilize pyruvic acid and others. You may have heard of malic acid or fumaric acid. In Circadia, we have our switch treatment. Some of you may be utilizing and be fans of the switch treatment. That uses pyruvic acid and succinic acid. They're positioned at the top and at the bottom of the Krebs cycle, and they can actually help to initiate additional ATP production. Because in a mature, damaged skin, we have, simply put, a lack of energy. Right? There's a lack of cell turnover. The fibroblasts aren't making as much collagen. They're not making as much elastin. So by simply increasing the amount of energy output, those cells are going to start to do the things that they used to do when they were much younger and healthy and more viable. Now, with the addition of energy output, again, we're also increasing the amount of free radical production. So to counterbalance that, we create more superoxide dismutase, the enzyme that helps to reduce it. So the switch has been and still is kind of our signature system for treating aging skin. So really, really well put out, well thought out, and it's a testament to the genius of Dr. Pugliese of really having a great understanding, being one of the first physicians to embrace the aesthetic industry and combine the science of being a physician and also aesthetics together. So that's a really interesting approach on all of this. The family of reactive oxygen species, superoxide and hydroxyl radical, those again are the two big free radicals that we see inside this family. Hydrogen peroxide is also one. It's one that we see that doesn't get used much because it metabolizes quickly to the hydroxyl radical. Any questions on any of that, Caitlin? Again, I know that's a lot of information, and it's very different than doing a presentation live.
It is, but we did have one question that came in that I thought was great, especially with talking about inflammation and the difference between chronic and acute inflammation is if inflammation is such a factor with aging, which clearly it is, then wouldn't things like chemical peels and lasers and things that are designed to be inflammatory create excessive aging? And then maybe detailing out the difference between chronic versus acute.
You know what? That's such a great question, and we are. So with a chemical peel, with the exfoliation like that, what we're doing is we're creating, and I don't really like to utilize the expression, but it's called a controlled wound. So we're initiating a wound, but we're really relying on the skin's ability to initiate repair as well. So we're damaging the surface of the skin to a certain degree to create a repair response. And when we see that happen, what we are actually engaging is the fibroblast cells. When you even put the smallest amount of pressure on the surface of the skin, it will require the fibroblast cells to produce collagen, because collagen is the primary protein of the dermis, so it's building up a better foundation. So the same thing's happening with a chemical peel. It's initiating the fibroblast cell to produce more connective tissue. On the surface of the skin, because we're removing that protein that's there, the stratum corneum, it's causing the basal layer to turn over faster. So again, in a mature damaged skin, you start to see a restoration in what's called dermal papillae. And we'll look at a slide later that'll show this, which are these peaks and valleys, which allow a little bit more rigidity and buoyancy to the surface of the skin. But yes, there is, of course, absolutely benefit to utilizing chemical peels for initiating controlled inflammation in a controlled wound. But absolutely, you can push that mechanism so far, and the analogy is, you can only whack a horse so many times before he whacks you back, right? It's gonna create more trauma than good, and we can actually see that not just with chemical peels, but also with ingredients that we know will also create inflammation. Things that were cutting edge at the time, but when used in conjunction together, that can really have a seriously negative impact on the appearance of the skin. And for sure, chemical peels can do that if they're overused. And we are no doubt an exfoliation happy industry, which is why we have to be very responsible of how we actually exfoliate the skin. Peels are not a one size fits all concept. And for those of you that have taken our peel certifications and seen our peel classes, you understand that there are varying levels of peels. Not everybody should be getting a Jesner. We have lower concentrations and lower penetrating solutions to be able to gauge what type of peel is right for your clients. And peeling is not for everybody.
Okay, great. And then one more thing before we move on. If you could just detail out the Krebs cycle once more, and then knowing that the switch works specifically on creating energy, who would then be the best candidate for the switch?
Sure, absolutely. So again, the Krebs cycle functions within the mitochondria, right? So the Krebs cycle is here, and you can almost think of the Krebs cycle as a water wheel. It's called the citric acid cycle because one of the precursors is actually citric acid. You may also see it as the TCA cycle, but if you're reading it in the literature as TCA cycle, it is tricarboxylic acid, not trichloroacetic acid, which is the peel. It can get a little confusing, so just double check your resources there. But again, what happens is the glucose, which is the sugar, enters through the bloodstream into the cell. Once the glucose, the sugar, is in the cell, it's a process called glycolysis, and glycolysis then converts the sugar into pyruvic acid. Pyruvic acid then enters into the mitochondria, is taken up by the Krebs cycle, and there's a series of bioactive conversions. NADH plays a huge part here. Actually, NAD, which actually takes hydrogens, right, in the long term, and this can get to be a very, very long explanation, but really what's happening here is we have hydrogens that are being taken away from this process, right? Hydrogens are being carried away from the Krebs cycle all along. And when we go back, the hydrogens are being carried and dumped away from and in between this double membrane structure. I don't know if you can see here with this arrow, but the hydrogens end up in between the inner and the outer membrane. And the only way for them to come back, they're trying to get desperately to get back in, and the only place for them to come back is through a space called an enzyme called ATP synthase. And that's where a lot of the rest of the ATP is actually created. And that's a process called oxidative phosphorylation. So while there's quite a bit of ATP that's being created here, there's another part of this that's called oxidative phosphorylation. But just kickstarting it with pyruvic and succinic acid will generate a significant amount, which means switch is more for an aging population. It's best for your aging clientele. All right, anybody who is already showing visible signs of wrinkling, expression lines, pigmentation, really anybody 40 plus, because that's when we start to see a dramatic dip in the amount of energy production that the cell produces anyway. Women in particular, between 37 and 40, there's a lot of varying factors there, but anyone the more damaged, the more aged the appearance, usually the better results we see with switch in a shorter period of time. And we refer to the switch as an anti-peel, right? It's an alternative to a peel. It's not damaging the skin the way that most chemical exfoliants are designed to do. Because we're using pyruvic and succinic acid, these are biological acids, but the more frequently it's done, once a month for 12 months, the better the results are.
Okay, great.
Okay. All right, we're going to keep moving on here. So I wanted to put this slide in here to discuss barrier function. We talk a lot about barrier function, the importance of and maintaining good barrier function. But that's done with appropriate hydration, using appropriate emollients and humectants. It also comes with making sure that your clients are hydrated, making sure they're getting enough water content in their diet, essential fatty acid content. That has a lot to do with how your treatments, specifically chemical exfoliation, will actually turn out. It also gives you a good insight into what their lifestyle choices are like, because you can give them the best treatments in the world and put them in the best home care regimens, but if they're not taking care of themselves at home, it's all for naught. Glycation. We still have a lot to cover, but glycation is something that we've been talking about for quite some time, and we've done entire lectures on just glycation, but I want to keep it to the most important points here. Glycation is something that happens when you have a non-enzymatic joining of sugar compounds with proteins, lipids, and amino acids. In professional skincare, it's most relevant to us when we have protein, collagen, and elastin joining with sugar compounds. And it happens primarily through dietary intake. When we have food that has high temperature cooking, anything that's baked and caramelized and fried, any type of browning of meats, anything that's cooked above 60 degrees, steak, fried chicken, or cookies, anything that you enjoy eating, anything that tastes good to you, will have a significant amount of glycation in it. And it has what are called, very appropriately named, advanced glycation end product, or AGEs for short. And they're exponentially higher in cooked and baked foods than they are in raw foods. What happens is when you consume these advanced glycation end products, they're basically what are referred to as ligands, and they will bind to the outside of receptors on cells, and they will influence the behavior of other cells. They will tell cells what to do, and they will release what are called inflammatory cytokines. So these are peptides that will influence the behavior of other cells, and they will increase inflammatory processes, and they're linked to just about every aging disease that you can imagine. Everything from diabetes, atherosclerosis, heart failure, renal failure, everything that you can imagine, glycation is now linked to from an aging perspective. So when it comes to skin, what we see is it helps to create a stiffening and a brittling of those very critical proteins, and it's every protein really. It's not just those two that I mentioned, but fibronectin, benementin, laminin 5, all of the proteins that are within the skin, even polysaccharides like hyaluronic acid, they're capable of becoming glycated. And I have a lot of people that say, well, this is glycation, this is glycation. Yes, you can have the ability to identify glycation, but again, it's one element of multiple elements that you're seeing from an aging picture. You really can't look at a wrinkle and say, well, that one's from glycation. It's glycation, it's ultraviolet damage, it's ultraviolet exposure, it's telomere attrition. It's all these things together that we see as a picture of aging. We are all suffering from glycation. Every time we're consuming those foods and engaging in those behaviors, smoking can actually engage glycation as well, so can a number of other things. It's a cumulative picture. Cooking, as I mentioned, induces it the most through what's called the Maillard reaction. It's the browning process. You can actually smell the Maillard reaction. It also releases these beautiful aromatic compounds. It's what you smell when you walk into a steakhouse. That's the Maillard reaction at work, calling you like the Pied Piper. But this is actually what's happening. Those ligands, those advanced glycation end products are binding to the receptors, and they're influencing the behavior of the cells. This guy is the major culprit. If you identify this one, it's called NF-kappa B. It's a transcription factor that becomes overactivated by these advanced glycation end products. It's a very important transcription factor. It helps with antiviral attack and new cell growth, but overactivation from glycation is a major, major problem when it comes to this one. And it influences the behavior of the cells, and it will tell the cells to release these inflammatory cytokines. And if you're not familiar with the concept of cytokines, a cytokine is a peptide that's made by a cell in the body that's released by that cell and can influence the behavior of other cells around it. So if you're not familiar with that concept, it's a good one to do a little bit of research on it. This is something that, again, has been a little bit more talked about and discussed in the industry in the last, maybe 5 years or so. My grandfather's been talking about it. We've had a couple products available for many years. Specifically designed to treat the effects of glycation. And we get the question all the time, who are these for? Prevention is the key with glycation, but you can also start to see a reversal of some of the effects when treated properly. So we have a serum called the Counter Age, again, very appropriately named, AGE, reversing those ages, the advanced glycation end products, as well as the Glyco Guard, helping to protect against the glycation. So things like benfotiamine, aminoguanidine, carnosine, which is probably the most popular anti-glycation ingredient. Also some trade ingredients that we utilize, like Deglige, Valistine, sorry, it escaped me at the moment. Things that are very commonly used, but also some things that are a little bit more specialty items. It's a serum and a lotion combination, and really, truthfully, again, two very underrated products within the line because people have a little bit of a misunderstanding. It's a difficult concept for an esthetician to understand sometimes, and even more difficult to explain the reasoning why to the clients of why they actually need something like this. But most places that are treating a little bit more of a holistic perspective really have a tendency to do well with these two products. Caitlin, any questions on any of that we covered?
We do, yes. So we have a great question from Colleen here regarding the difference between the sugars that are necessary for, being converted to pyruvic acid and creating ATP versus the sugar that's causing glycation. So can you kind of shed some light on the difference there?
So there really is no difference. It's actually how they're prepared, how they're formed, how they're created. So it's the high temperature. It's the temperature that has everything to do with how these advanced glycation products are actually formed. You can actually eat a spoonful of raw sugar, and there's very little glycation that's found in that. When you add heat to it, it exponentially increases the amount of glycation that you're going to find there. So heat is the factor. It's the aggravating factor there. In fact, when you take a glass of milk, which naturally has a high level of sugar and protein in it, and you heat it above 60 degrees, it increases the amount of glycation products by over 1 million. So while those numbers might not be mean a whole lot, it's significant when it comes to the impact that it has on the body overall. So what I don't want to do is scare people and say, well, I shouldn't eat this, I shouldn't eat that. It's things that we already know, right? It's things that we already know to avoid, or at least to minimize. You're never going to get rid of it altogether. You can do some research on this. There's universities all over the country, all over the world, that are measuring the amount of glycation in different foods. They'll take 100 grams of, this food, raw carrots versus, cooked carrots, steamed carrots, and tell you exactly how much glycation is in there. The last we checked, duck skin 100 grams of duck skin was the highest amount of glycation ever measured in a food. And while duck skin is probably not a staple of most of your diets, things like chicken skin are relatively close behind. But there are supplements that can be taken. Like I said, aminoguanidine is one. I don't think aminoguanidine is allowed in the United States anymore. In fact, I think that's pulled off the market in the U.S. for cosmetic and for dietary intake. Benfotiamine is still allowed. Pyridoxamine, which is one of the B vitamins, is actually incredible for treatment of glycation. Carnosine is another one that I take regularly for treatment of glycation in combination with carnitine, which is a fantastic metabolic booster. Carnitine will actually shuttle fatty acids before glucose into the mitochondria. So if you're on a weight loss program, that works even better. And carnitine is good for cognitive function. So if you want to be skinny and smart, carnitine is something you should definitely look into. I mean, that's just really interesting one to take a look at. But anti-glycation is just something that is really an interesting, just overall interesting concept, because it's linked to so many things, and the more you look at it, it's like, wow, this is something we really need to be studying more. And it's kind of still in the margins of professional skincare, and unfortunately somewhat ignored.
Well, who doesn't want to be smart and skinny? That's just a given. But
I'm working on it.
As far as really like recommending these particular products, I know you said that they're definitely underused products within our collection, but who and how would you recommend them, and how would you fit them into a standard skincare regimen?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, prevention is really the best option. So these are great for a younger audience, someone who's in their 20s, who's looking to keep their skin in best possible shape that they can, 20s or 30s. They're moving to a more sophisticated brand like Circadia, away from possibly a drugstore or beauty counter product. Or, someone who has already seen the visible signs of damage, an esthetician who's saying, we appear to be seeing multiple signs of damage that could potentially be from glycation and UV exposure and oxidative stress and all the other things that we've talked about. One of the great things about these products, especially as a system, with something like Matrixyl Synth 6, which is a peptide that works very quickly to help address the integrity of the collagen, specifically types 1, 3, and 4, is that it works to restore those. So while it's helping with tensile strength and collagen density in the skin, it's working on reversing glycation. So you're really doing a number of different things with these products. It's going to give you an immediate result, and it's going to work on long-term result. So it's good. It's really good for everybody. But prevention means everything, right? It really, the more you can get out in front of something, the better the results will be in the long term.
Okay, great.
Okay. And as I noted early on, this would probably be a little bit longer, so we should allot for about an hour and a half for this one, so we'll probably have about another 30 minutes to go for this one. Stem cell exhaustion. So this is something that we talk about pretty often as it relates to, the overall appearance of the skin. And again, as we start to hit 35, 40, what we start to see is a flattening out of this base layer. And you can see here, this is a skin slide, a histological punch biopsy of someone who's 18. And you can see these beautiful peaks and valleys. These are dermal papillae, ready pegs. And that means that this basal layer is turning over at a relatively rapid rate. This is turning over, these cells are dividing probably once every 10, maybe 15 days. Very well-aligned stratum corneum, nice and compacted. You can count the individual granular cells, and it just looks overall healthy. But as we progress into those mature years, as we're accumulating those damage from the intrinsic and extrinsic factors, what we begin to see is a flattening out of that basal layer. And that's the classic sign that it's just not turning over as quickly. And that, again, has so many factors involved there. But oftentimes it has a lot to do with the stem cells. Anywhere from 2 to 7% of the stem cells here in the basal layer are just exhausted. They're kind of petering out, and they just don't have the energy that they used to. So with the introduction of things like vitamin A, other things that can help to increase ATP production, we can actually start to see and get cells to behave quite like this. And one of the top performers in that category is vitamin A. So we'll talk real briefly about the vitamin A collection from Circadia and how you can utilize this. So the nighttime repair is our intro. It's a 0.3% retinol acetate. It's a retinol ester. We have a retinol product, which we'll talk about, but a retinol ester is basically a combination of retinol, which is the alcohol form of vitamin A, and this one we're using acetic acid, but you can have retinol palmitate, retinol acetate, retinol propionate. There's a number of others. I like retinol acetate because it's about 89% retinol and 11% acetic acid, so it gives us the tolerability and the stability of an ester, but still the efficacy of what you would expect from almost a full strength retinol. 0.3% is a good intro level. You always want to start relatively small with the amount of vitamin A that you have, and then ultimately build up to something a little bit stronger. Right? If you jump in with a high percentage of vitamin A, oftentimes the skin's going to get flaky. You'll see redness, possibly some peeling, possibly some blemishing if someone's prone to acne. And those can all be problems. People are going to return the product and say, this is, I'm having a reaction, and they're not. They're just having that type of response to vitamin A. So they use the product for anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks. That's usually about how long it takes to go through a full bottle. Using it at nighttime because, again, it's a proliferative agent. We want to use it in the evening. And then they come back, and if you like what they see, so you like what you see, they like what they see, then you can progress to the next level. But we also have a very, very complete anti-aging formulation here. This is not just a vitamin A product. We're using, again, Matrixyl Synth 6, which is one of the great forms of Matrixyl that helps to structurally improve collagen types 1, 3, and 4, the major types of collagen that we're targeting with our anti-aging treatments. We have ergothioneine, which is thiotane. It's an ancillary antioxidant to vitamin A, vitamin C, helps vitamin C to do all the things that it does better. Thiophanol acetate, which is a form of vitamin E. And we have phytocert, which is a form
Well, I think we might, there, sorry, Michael, you cut out there for just like the past 10 seconds.
Okay, sorry. Did you catch the phytocert?
We heard phyto and then and you cut out.
Sorry, the phytocert. It contains carnosine. So it's a Mexican bamboo, but one of the ingredient into even as kind of a standard anti-aging product. So a very well complete, very well-rounded anti-aging product. So it's our entry-level vitamin A product, but you start with this, again, usually 4, 6, sometimes 8 weeks, depending on how frequent of the use and how much you're using. That's how long this product's going to last. You bump to the nighttime repair plus, which is a 0.5%. So now that's a 0.5% vitamin A. Again, relatively similar formula. We've added something called roxasomes, which assists with DNA repair. So again, usually a little bit more mature audience is going to need something a little bit heavier, but the DNA repair is that additional, gives just that little additional boost. Some clients just won't acclimate well to that additional 0.2% of vitamin A, but almost all will. Every once in a while we get somebody that just says, well, this is a little too much, and then we just keep them on the regular nighttime repair. But almost always they do just fine on the regular nighttime repair. They'll do great on the nighttime repair plus. So again, keep them on this product until they finish this bottle. And then if they come back and you want to push the envelope a little bit further, right? Let's say you've got someone who has, again, a little bit more of a progressed aging condition, then you can introduce the vitamin A boosting cream, which is the next product. However, you keep them on the nighttime repair plus. Remember, we're applying night creams, face, neck, and décolleté, but you keep them on the nighttime repair plus. The boosting cream is a full 1% product. So we're going to spot treat over the nighttime repair plus in target areas. So forehead, around the eyes, nasolabial folds, right? If we're working vertical lines around the mouth, maybe we're doing chest, neck, décolleté, target areas, because it is, again, a full 1%. Right, so Nighttime Repair Plus at 0.5% face, neck, and décolleté, targeting those expression areas with the boosting cream. Does that make sense to everyone? All right. Hopefully that came through the way I wanted it to. The really interesting and great thing about layering vitamin A products is that when you do that, you accumulate percentage. So with the two of them together, the Nighttime Repair Plus and the Vitamin A Boosting Cream, you've now got 1.5%, which is a significant amount of vitamin A. We have one more vitamin A product, which is actually the full 1% retinol. This is a true 1% retinol. It's our big gun. It's a heavy-duty product. Most people that will use it for 2 days or more will see some level of actual physical peeling. They'll start to get a little bit of lifting, a little bit of peeling. Very different as far as application. I know we're not talking a lot about level or order of application here, but you'll typically put this on immediately after cleansing because it's an ethanol-based application. Those of you that are familiar with our vitamin A accelerator, it's very similar in formulation. So this goes on right after cleansing, and it's very targeted for deep expression lines for lifting, and most people should not be on this for an extended period of time. Okay, any questions on the vitamin A, Caitlin? Anything else we want to address?
So just to confirm that the vitamin A and its relationship to stem cell exhaustion, does the vitamin A have a negative effect on stem cells?
That's always a great question. And if you ever want to hear a highly debated topic around our household, my grandfather is 94 years old, and he will still debate with me heavily with the Hayflick limit, which basically states that there's only 50 cell divisions per cell, which is not accurate because we know that he at 94, his cells have been dividing well past 50 cell divisions. The potential hazard of utilizing vitamin A comes more so from the fact that when you're over proliferating the skin and overturning the skin too quickly, you get a thinning of the stratum corneum. It becomes overcompacted. You want a certain amount of stratum corneum thinning. You want a certain amount of compaction because it becomes more flexible and reflects light and adds a much more youthful appearance, especially in a more mature skin. And it'll thicken the granular layer, which we want, and of course, again, it helps to restore that dermal papillae. But as far as a stem cell exhaustion perspective, the answer should be no. It should be no. But if you're overusing and way overusing the product, the potential is yes. Typically, we see that with a prescription strength retinoic acid. All of the things that I just mentioned would be an overuse of a retinoic acid. But that should be used cyclically anyway. That's typically how retinoic acid should be prescribed. But used with a cosmetic grade, it's rare. It's very rare. And what ends up happening is you end up seeing what's called parakeratotic skin. You see, you have immature cells at the upper layers of the skin. Right? There's no corneified cells that are there, and it's very red, very inflamed looking skin. And that's the major issue.
Okay, great. And this question is not necessarily related to the vitamin A products, but we have gotten this question in previous webinars, and it could possibly be a good subject for one of our upcoming Wednesday webinars. But there's a lot of questions coming in on the forum as well about using masks and the irritation and the moisture that's getting trapped underneath the mask. Depending on what kind you're using and what kind of treatment options, why is this happening, and what can you do to prevent it and to help to heal it. Maybe you can weigh in.
Masks?
Yeah, like a face mask.
Oh, masks. Okay. What was the question?
There's a lot of irritation. People are getting, raw areas from the moisture getting trapped underneath the mask. Right. Any sort of bacteria or fungus that might also be getting trapped inside the mask. Are there good options for it?
There's actually a lot of problems that are happening there with the mask. There's a few. Yes, there's a bacterial. There's actually a follicular irritation. There's a name for it. I was just looking at this yesterday. It's funny it came up now. But there's a it'll come to me. We'll have to come back to them with that. But yeah, there's some anti-inflammatories that we utilize. The post peel will definitely be good for that because of what it has, helping to create a little bit more of a barrier. Would be good, but it is trapping a lot of moisture, so we've got to be very careful about not over trapping, because when you occlude the skin, when you trap all that moisture, it's creating a lot of softness, and too much occlusion and moisture will soften what is corneofied at the surface of the skin. It will trap too much, and that's what's causing the rubbing and causing the irritation. So we can talk a little bit more about that and give some suggestion, but when the mask is off, something that will definitely help would be the post peel. But you got to be careful how much occlusion you have and trapping of moisture you have on the surface of the skin when you're dealing with that already, and that's what's happening. But there's something very specific about how the follicle is being irritated, and how there's a specific bacteria that's getting into the follicle because of all the movement that's happening there.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, we can definitely do more research and maybe address it on a different webinar.
Yeah, we can do that. Okay, let's keep moving along here. We've got quite a bit to cover. So telomeres. So telomere attrition is something that has come up. There was a couple products years ago that were highlighting the extension of telomeres. You can think of telomeres as little extensions on the end of DNA structures, and every time the DNA cell divides, a little piece of the DNA comes off, a little piece of the telomere comes off. And the notion is that every time it divides, well, they're there to protect, but there's only so many cell divisions, which is not 100% accurate. But certainly what we know is that long telomeres are associated with long, healthy, viable cells and cell life. The shorter the telomere, the more potentially dangerous it is for that cell. But the other issue is that we know that in certain cancer cells, there's massive amounts of an enzyme called telomerase, which is allowing these cells to divide unchecked. So there were companies that were putting telomerase enzyme inside skincare products, and there was an outrage over this. Now, fortunately, telomerase is a huge enzyme and doesn't penetrate into the skin anyway, but most people stopped using it right away. What's interesting is that there are some ingredients that have been shown to help safely allow for telomere extension. A lot of them are topical. Most of them are actually taken orally as well. You can do some research and see what's out there available. We're not really working with anything specifically that's making that claim of actually helping to extend the telomeres. What we're focused on is making sure that we can have things that are helping to assist with DNA repair. But telomere attrition is something that has certainly come up in the past when it comes to chopping into live, healthy DNA structures. But it's much more focused on when it comes to medicine and overall health. Progeria, this is something that I've talked about a little bit, and it's interesting because this is also something that's come down from medicine, and there's an ingredient that we utilize that I highlight, and I wanted to highlight here. Progeria is a genetic disorder, and it's caused from a mutation of what's called the lamin A gene into a protein called progerin. Progeria actually means before old age, and as you can see, it affects children, and most of them die before their 15th birthday, and it's a progression of advanced aging, right? They all look as if they are well into their advanced age years. They have full body alopecia, scleroderma, atherosclerosis, and it's a genetic defect. But what's interesting is during pharmaceutical research for treatment of this genetic disorder, what they found is that individuals had a high percentage, high concentration of this progerin protein. It's not a mutation of the gene, but the actual protein itself inside their cells, specifically inside skin cells. So what they found is that this progerin protein was able to be broken down with certain ingredient technologies. And as soon as it was broken down, it was able to be disposed of by the cell and there was an immediate increase in ATP production. Now, a lot of that is medical claim, medical technology, so they kept it to, well, this is an anti-aging claim and it helps to reduce wrinkles, but the ingredient that I'm talking about is called, come back to that in a moment, progeline. And progeline, again, it does help to reduce visible signs of wrinkles, but progeline is directly linked to the research on progerin. So it's, again, a classic example of pharmaceutical research, medical technology making its way into cosmetic. And we developed this product, it's over 6 years ago now that I'm thinking about it. But it was really exciting to see that and say, okay, we're working on a product that's designed to assist with cell-to-cell communication in a very positive way. We know that, the idea that a system, the cells are a system, it's a network, right? We know that cells are communicating with each other. The notion here is that if cells communicate better, they will function better. If a system functions better, it's going to look better. And we know that that is absolutely the case. So that's really what the cytocom is designed to do. It's a cell-to-cell communication network that's designed to communicate and allow it to function and to work better. But the progeline is something that's allowing for the breakdown of this very specific progerin protein. We also have a form of vitamin C, aminopropyl phosphate, and a number of amino acids that are assisting with different functions in the skin, including hydration, protein synthesis. But it's absolutely a beautiful product, hyaluronic acid based, and a very unique anti-aging product that's addressing a need that not a lot of people are aware of. It's a specialty product in the brand, again, kind of a little bit of an unsung hero in the Circadia line, but works very well, especially in conjunction with the revitacite complex. People ask me all the time, who's this for? I recommend this for those that are not using the vitamin A, but are working with Switch and the revitacite. It's a perfect add. It's a perfect addition to that regimen. Nothing that says that you can't use it if you are using the vitamin A, but for those that are using the revitacite, I think this is a perfect pairing. Any questions on that, Caitlin?
No, we don't have any questions there.
Okay. This is something that I also wanted to highlight. This is a condition called xeroderma pigmentosum, and this is essentially an allergy to the sun. I talked about the process of excision repair, and these are all referred to as the progeroid syndromes. There's several others, Werner syndrome, that I didn't highlight, we didn't discuss here. But basically what's happening here is the ability to exact excision repair, to take out that damaged DNA structure and replace it with the healthy one. These individuals don't have that. Again, it's a genetic defect. So they are essentially allergic to the sun, and what they end up with is these massive amounts of squamous cell carcinoma and melanoma. So these types of conditions, this one including progeria, xeroderma pigmentosum, and progeria, this is also spurring a lot of not only pharmaceutical research, but this is how we have access to some of the research and knowledge and technology that we have in the professional skincare industry. So it's fascinating because many of the suppliers in the industry that we get skincare ingredients from, they're pharmaceutical companies with cosmeceutical divisions, right? They allow us to access some of these cosmetic technologies, which is fantastic for us. It's fantastic for performance ingredients, but also advancement in the industry. Okay, I'm going to breeze over some of this because I know we're running really long on time now. Talking a little bit about ultraviolet exposure. Clearly, we know that UV exposure is a terrible thing. The different wavelengths and rays that we see from the sun, UVA and UVB, are the two ones that we have to contend with. UVA has a much lower energy, UVB is much stronger, and that has to do with the actual wavelength. The longer the wave, actually, the lower the energy. The shorter the wavelength, the stronger it is, but the more shallow the penetration into the skin. Fortunately, we do not have to contend with UVC. UVC is something that is bound up in the atmosphere. It does not make its way to the surface of the earth, so it's not something that we have to be concerned with, because if it did, that would be a big problem. The energy emitted from UVC is extremely dangerous and could be very hazardous if we had to deal with it. Again, this is that DNA damage that we talked about, and a major problem. That image that I showed you of xeroderma pigmentosum, they cannot repair this damage. They cannot exact this excision repair, and that's why they have that what we refer to as an allergy to the sun. As I mentioned, UVB, that energy that's creating that cross-linking, it's creating that dimer, and that ultimately leads to the mutation and potentially that carcinoma, and it's because the energy is so strong. And we talk about different basal cell carcinoma. It is the most common, but it's also treatable. Most people will end up with some level of basal cell carcinoma before their end of their life. Squamous cell carcinoma is a little bit more fatal, but obviously early detection is the key. Melanoma Awareness Month, May, early detection again, but the different types of melanoma, they don't necessarily have to arise from ultraviolet exposure, but about 80% of them do. I'll be done shortly. Okay. UVA is a little bit different. So UVA wavelength being longer, it does again penetrate a little bit deeper into the skin, but fortunately, it does not have the same type of energy to be able to cross-link the DNA structures. If it did, that would be a big problem. But it does have the energy to cross-link those dermal proteins. So that's what we refer to as elastosis. And a lot of the aging that we see, visible signs of aging, not just pigmentation, but the wrinkling and the expression, that's coming from UVA. So you may have heard the expression we refer to as UVA as the UV aging ray, UVB as the UV burn ray, or UV basal cell carcinoma ray. That's very common to refer to those two interchangeably. So here again we have two images. The illustrations on the top showing a young versus a mature skin. The histological punch biopsies on the bottom showing a young versus a mature skin. You can see some pretty stark differences here, some pretty interesting differences. So on the bottom image you see a very buoyant skin. You have good structural integrity, collagen and elastin content. The bottom, all these black spaces, all these holes that have been created, that is direct ultraviolet exposure, oxidative stress. Of course, the dermal papillae, those ready pegs, those peaks and valleys that we see, of course, in the image, you can see them much more prominent versus the mature skin, very flat. Classic sign that we know that this basal layer is not turning over. These cells are not moving as quickly as they once did. The very not well aligned, thicker stratum corneum, a lot more keratin and protein buildup at the surface. The great thing about all this that we're seeing here, however, that we're discussing, is that we can take skin that looks and behaves like this and get it looking and behaving like younger, healthy skin. I think I've said it probably about half a dozen times so far, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So always recommending a good SPF, good sun protection factor is important. We've done a teaser the last two webinars, and we're collecting as much information as we possibly can to present a really good, thorough SPF protection webinar because we are getting ready to launch a new sunscreen here relatively soon. But again, just making sure that you've got something that has broad spectrum protection. That's the most important thing. It is relatively difficult these days because the regulations are forever changing between the United States, Europe, Asia, Australia. It's very difficult to formulate something that is universal, whether it be chemical, physical. So there are some challenges when it comes to making something that is good for everybody, and it has a lot to do with how things are made in the different parts of the world. But what we can guarantee you here is that we have a sunscreen. It does use chemical screens or filters, if you will. Things like avobenzone, octinoxate, octocrylene. They're not without controversy, mainly because they actually absorb the ultraviolet radiation and diffuse it as heat into the skin. But we get around the issue of diffusing as heat into the skin by using something called Solistay. Solistay is an award-winning photostabilizer, and what it does essentially is it absorbs that ultraviolet radiation, helps to absorb that ultraviolet radiation, and diffuse it back to the ground state without actually releasing it as heat energy into the skin. So unfortunately, we don't have enough time to do this particular subject justice because it is absolutely fascinating. This technology was developed by a company called Hallstar many years ago, and they're still marketing it today, and they're still improving on it today. And it was developed by a gentleman named Craig Bonda. and he's written papers called Quenching Excited State Molecules, and something that's a little bit more palatable for the esthetician called Photostability 101, and it talks about how we deal with energy and excited energy state molecules. But the bottom line is this ingredient helps to take these standard sunscreens and make them safer and more effective over longer periods of time, which is just absolutely incredible when it comes to advanced technology for sunscreen. So again, just making sure that you've got a good sunscreen. We recommend at least an SPF of 30, and making sure that you've got something that is broad spectrum. The number tells you how much of an UVB protection you get. Broad spectrum tells you that it is also covering what's called critical wavelength, which ensures that you have UVA protection as well. And it's not just a sun protection product. We have some other really great antioxidants that are helping to protect against the environment. So it really is a good environmental protection product, helping to protect against things like reactive oxygen species, which we've discussed already, also reactive nitrogen and reactive carbonyl species. These are other families of free radicals that we come in contact with. There's no shortage of free radicals that we come in contact with every day in our environment, ones that we make and ones that we are confronted with. I'm going to give just a couple minutes more here. Susie ran off with my phone, so I don't have any idea how much time we have left. So I'm going to talk a little bit about wrinkle formation, because again, everything we've just talked about adds to the appearance of wrinkles, but how do they actually form? And this came up in our educational forum, and if you're not already in our educational forum, I certainly encourage you to do that. As estheticians, it's a great place to get familiar with Circadia if you're not in there already. It's our international community of estheticians sharing knowledge and experience and before and afters and asking questions. And we have some of our administrators in there helping to answer questions from time to time. But the two things that really form wrinkles are muscle contraction and damage to the proteins, right? So again, collagen being 70% of the dermal proteins, that's the one that's most susceptible, but it's all the ones that we've discussed so far, including elastin and all the others. But when we have damage from, again, oxidative damage, ultraviolet exposure, glycation, all these things, it breaks down the integrity, but muscle contraction is what actually starts to form that wrinkle. So when we see the frontalis muscle on the forehead, right, wrinkles will form perpendicular to the long axis of how that muscle contracts. So the frontalis muscle goes up, wrinkles will form this way across the forehead. The orbicularis oculi muscle, which forms in circular bands around the eyes, that will form crow's feet, right? So when we got the question the other day, I hopped in there and people were asking, well, how do I use the MyoSight Plus? Well, you don't just treat underneath the eye with the MyoSight Plus. You go all the way up above the orbital arch, right? Because this is where the orbicularis oculi muscle is, right? So you're treating that entire muscle area, right? And I'll talk about the MyoSight Plus for those of you that aren't familiar. When you're treating vertical lines around the mouth, right, you're going all the way around the mouth here because the orbicularis oris muscles are going all the way around the mouth. Same with the nasal labial folds. So these are areas that you're treating. You don't want to use the MyoSight Plus in areas other than area of muscle contraction. Basically anywhere that you're going to receive a Botox injection is where you're going to be applying this product. We have two matrixels, Matrixel and Matrixel 3000, Snap 8 and Inulene. The matrixels are there to help to increase integrity of collagen content. They've been around for many, many years. Probably the most effective combination for helping to stimulate targeted collagen production. Snap 8 and Inulene, without question, are the two most effective muscle contraction inhibiting peptides on the market. They come from Lipotech. I've been working with that company for more than 12 years, and there is nothing better out there as far as a combination for helping to reduce expression lines. It's as good as it gets. And the percentage that we're working with these at, you're going to be hard pressed to find anything that even comes close. And it's one of the reasons why it has a higher price tag. So this is your creme de la creme when it comes to reducing expression lines. This is typically going to go right over the top of our vitamin C reversal serum, and then whatever home care regimen you're using, whether it's vitamin A, nighttime repair, and the pluses that we detailed, the Revitacite complex, the glycation products. This is in addition to anything if you're addressing aggressive expression lines.
And then
Caitlin, any questions on that?
we're right at about an hour and a half right now. But if anybody is interested in the Myo site, please look on our forum. We've just, recently had some people raving about it. There's tons of comments on how it works and how people are seeing results, even within the first week to 14 days of usage. So the forum's a great place to be able to see all of that information. But most recently, the Myo site has been a forum favorite, and there has been many people that have been giving their testimonials. So it's a fantastic place to get that kind of information.
Okay, well, I knew this was going to be a challenge today, trying to get as much information out as we did. So I'm going to go ahead and be respectful of everyone's time that tuned in and go ahead and wrap there today. However, I do want to just take a couple minutes because we are approaching the end of May and we're heading into June. So I know a lot of people are excited about getting back to work. We are certainly excited about that as well. But we want people to be able to take advantage of the current specials that we have. We've got an amazing deal that we're working with for the Essentials bundles. We know that not everyone is going to be able to get back to work just yet. We know there are still a lot of stay-at-home orders, and there's some uncertainty out there for quite a few of you. We're going to still do our best to support you every single way that we possibly can. So we are sending out the Essentials bundle with the cleanser, the light day sunscreen, and the SPF that we talked about, and including a complimentary blueberry and white tea hydrating mist that is for drop ship. That is also going to be including our staycation kit. So if that is a drop ship order for your client, it includes the blueberry and white tea hydrating mist for free and the staycation facial for free. For those of you that are reopening, for those of you that are placing your stocking orders, we have been bombarded with requests to purchase the staycation facial for your clients. If you've got inventory that you still have on hand, if you're just getting back into your spa now and you have product, you can now purchase the staycation kits. There's a cost attached to these for us. We cannot give them to you for free, so we have to wholesale these. So that we're wholesaling them for $25. Our suggested retail price for the facial was $50. But if you want to purchase them for wholesale to be able to move some inventory, we're making them available now. So you can reach out to our customer service team, the 1-800 number, info@circadia.com. We've made that option available to all of you, and we're going to do everything that we can to continue to support till all of you are back to work and get your businesses up and running. We're still running our body special for the month of May, our Mother's Day body special that includes the CBD bath soak, the Well CBD bath soak. So we're really excited about that. This was very popular. The Blue Bamboo and the Tidal Moisture, a big hit. Two incredible products that everybody really loves, right along with the Well CBD soak. And then, of course, for those of you that are maybe tuning in that aren't familiar with our dropship program, this is not a kickback program. You're a wholesale partner with us. You are a spa partner. So we are drop shipping directly to your clients, right? To your guests, but we are charging you. So you charge them, we charge you. We're just simply drop shipping the product. We are not charging your clients. We are not taking your clients' information. We are not contacting with your clients. Circadia is not a B2C business. We are a B2B business. We are for supplying the spa. So we are maintaining our customer relationship with you, and we are here to support the spa industry. So if you'd like a little bit more information on that, you need some more detail on that, please feel free to reach out to us. This is our 1-800 number. This is info@Circadia, or you can simply get into the forum and hear what our customers are talking about and hear what they're saying about all the great things that we're doing. Caitlin, any other questions that we want to address before we wrap things up for the day?
Not for the rest of the day. Many people are just chiming in and saying thank you so much for the elevated level of education that you've been putting out every single week. Trust me, it's not easy getting on and doing weekly webinars, especially at the level that Michael's presenting with all this information. So people are very appreciative of that. And we will let you all know about next Wednesday's topic as soon as possible.
Okay, well, again, thank you all so much for tuning in. We truly appreciate you being here, and stay safe out there, stay healthy. Good luck to all of you that are getting back to work, and hang in there. We are here with you, and we hope to see you again on next week's Wednesday webinar. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Take care.